Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us my good friend, Dave Smith, one of Legion of Skanks, host of Part of the Problem, star of Libertas, the #1 comedy concert album, which is such a huge accomplishment. I want to go in a completely different direction today. One of the things that I've been getting a response from the Dear Readers and the Problem Children is people like seeing us chat as friends and talk about things that normally wouldn't talk about. Because obviously you and I talk a lot about politics, we talk a lot about philosophy, war and things like that. I'm going to go in a completely different direction because this is the kind of stuff that I enjoy when it's someone who I've gotten to at least somewhat know indirectly through following them on podcasts. Are you familiar with the concept of love languages?
No.
Okay, this is so I had an editor named Jeremy Ruby Straus, and Jeremy is the guy behind like pretty much all testosterone in publishing. He discovered Tucker Max. He told Neil Strauss to write the game. He invented the WWF books. I mean, the guy really has his fingerprints all over all that stuff. He told, the Mankind book, which was the one who broke that industry open. And a lot of these self-help books, much like a lot of these business books, which are guys are self-help for like corporate types, have a lot of truth and insight in them packaged in stupidity and dumbed down for idiots. But the fact that their truths and innovations are there does not get diminished by this, so it's easy to talk shit on them. And the example Jeremy used, and I agree with him, Steve Harvey. When you hear, read a Steve Harvey joke, you're going to roll your eyes and, well, I'm not a black woman. One of the points he makes in this book is he tells women that until men are established at a certain point in their career, they're not going to be ready to settle down and put the ring on it. And until a man's kind of to some extent self-actualized. And I'm like, that's true. And that's an important thing for women to understand. So there's another book, and this is not from Jeremy. I was actually recommended to heard of this book through Matt Hughes, the UFC champion, who I co-authored a book with. Hold on, I'm getting my chair smaller. There we go. And that's not enough. And Love Languages talks about how different people express affection in different ways. And there are things like, I'm all blurry, but that's okay. As soon as I talk about love, the camera that can't even see me. There are things like, I'm going to look them up, and we're going to talk about what yours are, and we can talk about mine are, because this is something I think people do not expect us to discuss. So there's 5 love languages, okay? There's 5 different, and because of this, if different people have different love languages, it's going to be tough. And this is not just for your wife. This is for your friends and people like that, so on and so forth. I'm going to try to see if that makes me less blurry. And they are, and people probably going to like all 5, but there's, some that you deliver more and some that you are more receptive to. Words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch. What is your best way? How do you express affection? Let's not talk about the wife, because the wife is probably going to be all of them. Like with Lewis, or like one of your guy buddies.
Me and Lewis pretty much just shadow box next to each other. So
that's physical touch.
Physical touch would be with me and Lewis. But it is really interesting. And by the way, I started remembering that after you started describing it, that my wife has told me about this before. So now if she watches this, I'm gonna come off like a dick when I was like, no, I don't know what that is. So evidently listening is not one of my strong suits. But it is interesting how people receive them differently. But you're asking me how I express them,
yes,
to other people. I think probably with other like men, like my friends who are men, probably words of admiration are probably how I express it the most. Like telling people who I respect that I respect them, what I love about their work, what I love about them as a person, things like that. But yeah, so I would probably say that's how I express it to my friends most of the time.
Okay, and what is the one that most touches you? Do you want me to read all 5 again?
No, I think I got them. I would probably say the same. I think words of admiration. I think that's what means the most to me, is hearing what people admire about me, and particularly from people who I respect. Getting those words of admiration really means a lot to me.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting because all of them have something to be said for them. I think it's tough to narrow it down. I am very big on gifts. I think because a gift is a concretization of a memory. So a lot of times I've had people ask me for advice about like apologizing, right? If you want to apologize, how do you do it? And the point I say is, even if the other person is kicking and screaming, you have to give them some physical token or an experience to demonstrate that you meant it, some sacrifice on your behalf. Even what I used to do sometimes would be like, ask the boyfriend, what's if she wanted to buy a CD, what would she buy? Or what's a book she wants to buy? Because then it's talk is cheap, although it's often not. Like in your case, it would mean a lot, but I would want to have it not just the talk, that when you look at this book or this item, you'll remember, hey, I did the wrong thing, but I made it right. And it was so important for me to make it right that I put a gift to show you that this really matters to me. And this isn't just something I'm shrugging my shoulders about.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think it particularly makes sense with an apology attached to it, because the thing about an apology is that usually, I mean, I suppose it could be something you said that you're apologizing for, but usually it's something you've done. And to just apologize for it, there's this feeling that a lot of people have where it's almost like that just magically wipes it away. All you have to do is say some words.
Yeah.
And quite often it's disingenuous, and quite often it's just trying to get out of the situation. Well, if everybody acknowledges you were wrong, I apologize, and then basically it's like nothing happened. Whereas to attach a gift to that makes it at least something, like you have to put something into the apology. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
What I also love to do is to take the person out to dinner. How much is that going to cost you? 20 bucks. You're also now hanging out, so you're solidifying the relationship, and you're making memories. So I insist on it. And if they're like, no, it's okay. It's like, even if it's okay, fine. Let me take you out because I enjoy your company. Like, this is an excuse for us to hang. So I think, and the other thing that bothers me a lot is when people apologize and they think, well, I've done my part. Now we're just going to go back to where it was before. And it's like, that's not how it works. It's not incumbent on the actual victim to be like, fine, you're forgiven. It could be, I accept your apology. I still don't trust your judgment. I get why you did this, but I just don't think you're my kind of person or a good person. Like this happens a lot on like Twitter, right? Like if someone spoils one of my trolls, they ruin my fun. And they apologize, and I'll tell them, and I mean this, I'm not mad at you. I don't remember your name. It's just I don't trust your judgment. I trust my block more than I trust that you've had the capacity to understand what you did wrong and you're going to do it right again in the future. But another big one of mine, let's talk about this. One of the things that Rand discusses that I don't think she plays up enough, because I think a lot of what Rand was trying to do was to take down what in her era was overwhelmingly evil throughout the world. I think, I think, and I very much want to hear your perspective, that America 2020 is, and I can hear the autistic screeching from here. Just calm down, guys. In 2020 is a far freer country than it was in America 1957 when Atlas Shrugged was coming out. And here's why. The fact that you have you and I can do this. The fact that you have access to put your book out, that you don't have to go through these gatekeepers. The fact that you could have a fringe ideology and you're not going to be the only person at your school who has it. You're going to be able to easily find other people who share those interests online. The fact that fringe hobbies are not regarded as weird, but as something to valorize. Like the example I use for like my kind of people, there's two kinds of people who, when they meet someone who breeds guinea pigs, there's two reactions. Ew, why would you want to do that? That's weird. Or sit down and tell me everything. And, you know, in high school movies, like in the 80s, you have the jocks versus the nerds versus the whatever. Now the jocks and the nerds are friends. They respect, like the gamers respect like the bodybuilders who respect the political people. If everyone is like pushing themselves, there is a mutual admiration. It's very positive in my view. Do you think American 2020 is freer than it was in 57?
Well, are we talking America in 2020 in January and February, or March and April? Because those are very different on the scale of freedom. They're like two different countries. I think that there's a distinction between freedom and liberty that's important in that, because oftentimes libertarians are really talking about liberty when they talk about freedom. So liberty essentially is freedom from coercion.
Sure.
That nobody. So, and this is something that oftentimes like socialists will poke at libertarians with, and thinking it's like a gotcha moment, but they'll say, oh, okay, so if you go, if you're
free to starve.
Yes, well, right, but if you're lost on a desert island and it's a hurricane or something like that, it's like you have maximum liberty, but what type of freedom is this really? And obviously it's not a great life, even though you have all of your liberty intact. So freedom, just like in the general sense of the word, the idea that, like, I don't know, like if you have a car, that gives you freedom to travel further. If you have a jetpack, that gives you freedom from gravity, things like that. The only thing that's really ever given human beings freedom has been technology. Just imagine, think about like what housework was 150 years ago. Try to think about what doing housework is when you don't have a washing machine, a dishwasher, a vacuum cleaner, a refrigerator, like all of the things that we kind of take for granted. That all of these devices are incredibly freeing. Sure. It's when John D. Rockefeller with Standard Oil, like basically got people reading lamps, right? Like I think they were using like whale oil before the kerosene oil came out. People could read at night. Now this was like a thing that people couldn't do before. Right. If you didn't have money to get whale blubber or whatever they were burning before then, you couldn't read a book at night. The sun went down. That's it. You're screwed. So in that sense, yes, 2020, we're enormously freer than people were in 1957. No question. Now, in terms of liberties, it kind of depends on what pocket of people you're talking about.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Do you think it is easier, and I could be persuaded the other way, to be honest. Do you think it's easier for the average person, or the maybe a little bit off the beaten path person, not necessarily the average, to find their bliss in 2020 America or in 1957 America? Now, obviously, it depends on the person, sure, but I'm saying broadly speaking.
There's enormous benefits, and then there's some real problems. Sure. I think that, look, obviously, and this is just the reality of the situation. If you're talking about 1957 and you're including Black people in that, it's kind of a blowout of like, I mean, if you were living in the deep South in one of these state enforced Jim Crow areas, there was really a very strong limit to your freedom and liberty, from the culture, from the state, from all of these things. Poverty is nothing like it was in 1957. I mean, just like nothing like it was. The amount of just, I mean, there were people like living in situations that we really can't even think about.
There's this expression like, oh, mom always put dinner on the table. That's not a concern for anyone, really. I mean, we're being privileged, but that nowhere in comparison to the 50s.
Yes.
Where you have to worry about, okay, we're eating cornflakes again.
Yes. Now, I do think that there is, there's been some, I don't know how exactly I put this. There's been some cultural degeneration since then, and I think that's not unrelated to the improvement in wealth. You know what I mean? Like that comes with it. A lot of those old school cultural binds were what got people through very poor times.
Sure.
And so that has problems that come along with it. Overall, I think that like, is the question whether we have more liberty now than we did then? It really depends on the situation and the group. You know, like, I mean, if you're, you know, on the other side of a SWAT raid, you have less liberty than they did in 1957.
Sure.
If you're, again, like, you know, you're talking about America, but just to extend it to like the victims of American foreign policy, I mean, that's pretty brutal. Although, you know, World War I, World War II were even worse. So overall, I would say yes, we're, you know, everything today is kind of better.
I just think the way why I would be a firm yes is I think there are more choices for many people to find their own bliss. Like, I mean, the fact that we're talking about a college education being maybe a waste of time, I don't think that would make sense in 1957 standards. I think really, yeah, there's a few people who made their own business, but it really was understood. Maybe it was a status thing that if you want to be somebody, you're going to university, and it mattered more.
Yeah, but far less people went. And
Sure.
so you know, there are like, again, this is the thing where it's very hard for me to say one or the other, like yes or no, because there are, obviously, it's like, you know, when people bitch at the millennials, a lot of times
Sure.
they don't actually mean millennials.
Yeah,
When
right.
they say that, they mean like Zoomers or whatever.
Sure. Just like they mean boomers, they don't mean boomers. Just like people who
Yes.
don't know how to use technology. Yeah.
Yes. And it's easy to say, you know, look, like these kids, whatever they complain about, I mean, you know, my grandfather's generation just had it so much worse than they did. And that is true. I mean, I think that's just objectively true. I mean, my grandfather was like, you know, a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany. He came over here, he enlisted in the army, he went and saw combat there, and then worked like a pretty grueling factory job for his whole life. Now it's just going to be hard to convince me that any 20-year-old today is really suffering under a harder life than what he had. That being said, there are certainly issues where, like, we kind of have designed a system where you are really encouraged to go to college these days. And
Sure.
if you don't go to college, you really are, in many ways, and I think this is artificial, but you really are behind the 8 ball. I mean, there's going to be a lot of roads that are closed off to you if you don't go. You're kind of encouraged to be in the situation where you're going to be, you know, possibly $80,000 to $120,000 in debt by the time
Sure.
you turn 21. And because, you know, the government has artificially, you know, inflated and driven up so many of the prices of owning a home, healthcare, you know, a lot of the things that really are pretty important in life, it's pretty hard. There's a whole generation of Zoomers out here who are looking around like they're never going to own a house. They're never going to be able to, you know, and so I do think there are like very legitimate challenges for, you know, young people in today's culture. Overall, though, I would tend to agree with you. It's better than the challenge of being drafted to World War II or Vietnam or something like that.
I'm surprised that you and I are not having a similar perspective at the very least, because you never went to college. You're not educated.
I went, I left. I
Sure.
went for a year and a half.
But the point is, you're not educated, but you have a show based on ideas where it's stuff that you had to teach yourself and do the homework, and you read the news, and you're, you know, and are well informed on events, and you have to be articulate in portraying those events in terms that most people can understand. At the same time, you have a successful podcast series with Skanks, and your stand-up career is successful. Number one is not an accident, and number one is not a joke, and that is something that will never be taken away from you. This is my, what was the term that they used? Word of affirmation. And
I feel so much love.
But it's true. No one can ever take it. You know, I remember when, after I did my first book with Matt Hughes, and it hit the New York Times bestseller list, and I wasn't being able to round up my second gig, and it was getting scary. And my friend Molly, I was on the phone with her, and she goes, "You don't go from New York Times bestselling book to loser in 6 months." And the people don't understand is, like, a lot of times, especially when you're young, you do something and the job fails or whatever goes away. It's like, that can't ever be taken away from you. I will always be the Brooklyn spelling bee champion of 1986, I think it was. But it's a joke, but the same thing is like, let's suppose things fall apart with you in some capacity. You will always be Dave Smith, comma, #1 comedy album. That's a huge deal. So I'm surprised that you don't have more of a rosy perspective, especially being a dad, which is so awesome. When I just really think things are just great. And I feel like the Pollyanna talking to you here.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, I think things are really great for me. And I do, you know, like I'm really thrilled with all of those things that you just mentioned. And I particularly, because of my kind of like path and journey in the comedy world, I think I, much more so than some of my friends, really appreciate what I have. I
Yeah.
also, because I really didn't get, I mean, I was, you know, so I did comedy usually in stand up, like around 6-7 years into doing it, you start to get a little bit of the rewards of, you know, like a little bit of success. Nothing like major, but you get on TV or you get this or that, you get passed at different clubs, and you kind of like get these little things that are nice. And I really didn't. And I thought I would. And I think a lot of people around me thought I would too. And I really struggled late into my comedy career. You know, not like crazy late, but
Sure.
like I was like a decade in before things started kind of like working out for me. And I think that made me appreciate when things did start working out a lot more, because I really stared into the abyss of like, oh my God, I might fail at
Yeah.
this. And
Yeah.
having, you know, having the fan base that I have, and some of the successes that I've had, and then having, you know, meeting such a great wife and having such a great daughter, like I'm thrilled with all of this. I'm very happy with where my life is. But I don't know, if we're talking in general about the country, I don't know that that is a viable path for too many people. And I think that we have to some degree created a system that traps a large percentage of young people in this kind of just this, you know, like what Steve Bannon calls it, he calls them modern day well-fed serfs.
Yeah.
They're
Oh, yeah.
basically just kind of like, you're never going to own
Absolutely.
anything. It's very hard to have a family. It's very hard to like kind of get to this next step, but you're
Pets of the
really well
system.
fed.
They're pets of the system.
Yes, yes. You have fun gadgets and toys. You have a really cool iPhone, but I mean, it. You know, it's like, and I say this as somebody who's, you know, a husband and a father, which are, you know, by far the two most meaningful things I've ever been in my life. That let's say you were talking about somebody in 1957 who could graduate high school and go get a job that it really wasn't very hard to do. There was full employment. You were going to go get a job. That one family, that one income could sustain a family. You could easily go buy a house, own a car. Your wife didn't have to work. Your kids were being raised full time by one of their own parents. Just these stronger kind of community bonds. This is pre-welfare state, so the welfare state hadn't kind of destroyed a lot of these cultural bonds that we had. Sure, you didn't have the really neat iPhone, but I do think that there's something that we lost about that that is not good.
Okay. I feel that it's important or incumbent on us in our positions. It's very easy when you're young, when you're an idiot by definition, because you know what the fuck's going on. You're 18, 20, 21. You could be the smartest person on earth. You're an idiot because you don't have the data. You have no idea how these things work, how these systems work. And it's can be very discouraging when your buddies are getting married or, you know, getting a house somehow through mom and dad, and you've got nothing to show for it. And it's very frustrating. And I think it's important for people like us, and I not only is important, it's easier to do it because I believe what I'm saying, you know, to give them hope and to be like, no, 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 things are great, and what you're experiencing is a temporary situation that's a function of both your age and your personality type and your intellect. But it seems like it's easier for me to say this honestly with a straight face than for you.
Well, I do think that that's you know, like I think that it's a more useful message, no question about it, always to like look at things optimistically. And you do have, there are opportunities everywhere in our society, you know, lockdown and stuff aside.
Sure.
So and that is my message, particularly to young men, that it's kind of like, hey, look, don't spend time feeling sorry for yourself. Grab life by the horns, and you can control this thing. You can author your own destiny. But I also am not going to lie to people. And if we're just talking about the system as a whole and the state of young people in today's country, I look, all of that is true. But I also think that there's truth to what I was saying before, that there is that there are a lot of legitimate obstacles and legitimate gripes that the Zoomer generation has.
So there's a quote from Camus, who's my favorite, and who I'm going to be doing a book on next. And his quote is, maybe it's not about happy endings, maybe it's about the journey. And I think that we trick ourselves into saying, oh, if X happens, then I'm going to be happy all the time. First of all, you're not. Like, get that out of your head. You're going to get used to whatever it is, and then you want the next thing. That's just hedonic, whatever the term for that is. And I remember I was watching this VH1 Behind the Music. This was a show they had 20 years ago where they would interview bands, and it was a documentary. And they did it on, you know, who had been my favorite band at the time, the Go-Go's. And Jane Wiedlin, who was the rhythm guitarist, said, oh, I can't wait till we're rock stars and we're all going to be happy all the time. She's like, it's such bullshit. She's got that chipmunk voice. I think we have this trick that, oh, if I only become an author, or if only I get to be a stand-up for a living, if only I get a girlfriend, right, then I'll be happy all the time. That's not how happiness works. It's like, you can say, if I buy a car, then I will have a car. Yes, A is A. You can't say, oh, I just need X and my emotions will follow suit. It's a fallacy. So I think it's important and truthful to remind people that fighting for a goal is the way to get happier, in many ways, even more than achieving the goal.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that. And I've certainly, you know, convinced myself of that many times in my life, like different things. If I can just accomplish X, then everything will change and everything will be good. It's a carrot on a stick that we dangle in front of ourselves. And I think it's probably like, there's probably like a genetic reason for that.
Oh,
Like,
sure.
this is how we, you know, human beings push themselves to accomplish goals. The thing is that whenever you get to that goal, you're still you. Like, at the end of the night, you're still left with your thoughts and your it doesn't like magically transform you into a different person. But I also think that it might be a useful delusion in some ways, because that is what kind of keeps people driving toward the next goal. But I think you're right. I think the kind of meaning of life in some weird way is then to always keep putting the carrot on the stick. And then kind of once it's not a carrot on a stick, because you can get to that goal eventually, but then you just shoot for the next goal and the next goal. And the real, you know, like beautiful thing is the process of trying to achieve something.
Let me tell you something else that is a great joy and value to me. And I want to know if there's something analogous to you, or maybe this is just I'm wired differently. There's an artist, and I talked about him on Rogan, named Sean Chow. And he makes these little whimsical dioramas. And there was one that was like $1,500, which is a lot of money. And when I saw him, I stumbled upon his work at Giant Robot. They were having an event. I just walked in there with my buddy Maddox, and I saw it in the wall. I'd never seen anything like it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I asked about the price. And I'm like, all right, someday I'm going to be able to afford this. So not only did I want it in terms of just visually, it was something that I was finding enjoyable. It also symbolized to have a certain measure of success where just once in my life, I'll be able to drop $1,500 on a piece of art and not have to bug out or feel regret. You know, like we all have those moments where it's like, you know, did I really need to pay this for that when I could have just used this coat for another year? You know, blah, blah, blah. And to not feel that guilt and to have it be an element of pure joy. And they were having a show when I was in LA, coincidentally. And there was one piece I really wanted. And long story short, they were putting it up on the wall. This was like, you know how like you have a show, they'll have one main image and then a bunch of others. This was the main image. And I kept like ringing up. I figured out. So they put the stuff on the wall the day before the show. I went to the gallery, booked it there, and I got the piece. And I'm looking at it right now. It hangs over my desk. Then when I was on Rogan, I get to bring him up. So I got to promote the guy, which meant a lot to him. Now he's just recently dropped a series of mini dioramas, and I scored 2 of them. They're $100 each, which isn't cheap, but it's hardly, gonna make the difference in being homeless. So this is one of an arapaima and like a sunfish. And this is one he just dropped. This is to raise money for kids who don't have food in Hawaii. It's just 2 koi, which I just really,
they're cool.
Yeah, they're really cool. And they're just so cute and they make me happy. The point is there, like when Libertas hit #1, do you have things that just concretize your joy in your life?
No, not in the way, not like that. Like I don't have an example that's similar to that, but what I really like to do, what really like really makes me happy is doing like special things with my wife. Like nights, you know what I mean? Like not
Quality
like necessarily
time. That's the 4th one. That's the 4th love language.
Yes, that's right. But there's something about it that I really enjoy, and it makes me feel so good, like that I can provide that. So things like, like there'll be like so many times it's like birthdays or holidays or whatever, where my wife will kind of be like, all right, let's not go crazy this time. Like we don't have to do anything like super fancy, but I always do anyway. Like I always just wanted. So like, I got her, she's was a huge fan of the movie Moonstruck.
Okay.
So for like, I don't know if you guys don't know the movie, it's with Cher. It's like real Italian Brooklyn movie, and anyway, it's great. And so I got her tickets for last Christmas to La Boheme at the Met, which is like the opera that they go to in that movie. And like we went out to like a fancy steakhouse beforehand and then went there. And I love doing things like that. And I really love that, like because of the like the fact that everything I have is off this career that I've made for myself, and that I can go do things like that. That really just like it's so worth it to me. And the fact that it's kind of like, look, everything's taken care of. I mean, we're not like rich, but everything's taken care of. We have more than what we need, and we can still go do these like really cool things. And especially because both me and my wife, we were like really like through our 20s, like fucking broke. Like we were never poor, like, oh my God, we're not going to fucking eat type shit, but we were broke, like didn't have extra money to spend on something like that. So that really brings me a lot of pleasure, that it's like, oh, okay. And also my father and grandfather were just incredibly cheap. They really fit the stereotype. And I hated that. And I will never live my life that way.
Yeah, I am also like really, really blessed because like the fans, like I'm like, okay, I want to get this. And people just chip in like tips. And the point is, it has to be something that is frivolous. In fact, just over the weekend, someone sent me $15 and he said, I'm bad with money. I want to give you something regularly, like while I can, I'll try it again. And I sent it back to him. And I said, if you're bad with money, don't waste it on me. The whole point of this is money that's wasted for you, and I'm going to waste it on something. And it'll just be, I think that's part of the like religious and cultural idea of feasts is we're going to be wasteful because we had a bounty, and we're going to celebrate being wasteful because we don't have to worry today about the next meal. We can celebrate in our abundance. And he sent the money back. He goes, no. He goes, to quote the vampire novelist, I'm doing this for me. And I'm like, all right. So like right now I've got my eye on, I can't believe it took me years to think of this, a signed copy of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, signed by the author of Roald Dahl. And I'm going to raise that by the end of the week. And the thing is, when I look at these things in my house, they bring me such joy because it's like people, instead of buying a drink for their friend, tossed me $10, and it's being spent not on my rent, but it's being spent on these little collectibles. So it's really kind of a sweet to see. What kind of feedback do you get? I think your fans are more what's the euphemism here? Maladjusted than mine, maybe.
I don't know. Perhaps. I think there's a lot of overlap between
Oh, for sure. Of
our fan
course.
bases. By the way, I think that's so fascinating, the thing you said about feasts. And I never really thought about it that way. But there's something, because think about like how much poorer people were
Oh,
at the
yeah.
time of feasts. I mean, this existed through times where if you were going into a winter, you were like looking at the person on your left and the person on your right and being like, I hope we all make it through this winter. Like life was really, really hard. So the idea of wasting at that time, like, seems almost, if we were machines and not human beings, you would be like, well, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
But there's something that's very human about that, where it's like, no matter how hard things are, you need to have something to look forward to. You need to have a memory of a great time. You need to have that at least one moment where it was like, oh, that was fucking awesome. And it's not just the same as every single day. So there's something just really interesting and really human about that. And then the part where you insulted my fan base, I don't know. Maybe they aren't adjusted.
Am I wrong though? You don't think that they tend to be more abrasive than mine?
I really don't know. I don't know how I would even measure that. Like on Twitter and shit like that,
Yeah,
you mean?
Twitter, YouTube comments, things like that.
Possibly. But I think there's this thing that happens, at least it's a dynamic that I've found, where people, if you look at like just my YouTube comments or tweet replies and things like that, I think you get an inaccurate
Okay.
view of what my base is like. I mean, and this is just true in general, where it's like it's the loudest, like it's the loudest, like 2% of your fan base are the ones who kind of dominate all that stuff. And like if you go to like a live show and hang out and talk to me, as I always do. Like I always hang out and talk and take pictures and meet everybody after a show. And if you like hang out with them there, you get a very different impression than you do if you're just like kind of reading the YouTube comments. So I don't really know, but there's certainly a percentage of them who are abrasive.
Sure. I mean, I'm certainly perfectly abrasive in my own way, and so are you. I was just talking about
Sure.
relatively. It's just, I mean, but I feel like you don't do as much weeding as I do with the social media stuff. Yeah.
That's for sure. I have a very different policy than you. Like I don't really, it's a free for all. I don't like, I don't really, even with my Facebook group on Twitter and all that, I don't really worry about who says what or comments. It's just like, it's all going to happen. Go for it. I very, very rarely block or mute people on Twitter.
Why is that?
Um, you know, Part of it, I guess, is like, I don't like to give them the satisfaction. I feel like if somebody's really shitty with me, they're almost like looking for you to block them so they can be like, got to you. And then part of it is that it doesn't bother me that much. I see this thing, particularly with people who are like really shitty insults online. I see it much more exposing of the person than it is anything that gets to me.
Oh,
Like
sure.
I have been genuinely in life. I've been at places where I was a very weak person, and I am today a very strong person. And I don't say that to brag. It's
Sure.
just, this is the reality of what my life has been. And when somebody says something like, if they post like, on Twitter, like you're a terrible comedian, or like you're whatever, something like this, it's just letting me know that they're a very weak person, because they think that will bother me. And you have to be in a position of weakness for that to bother you. And so they're kind of projecting their own thing. And I don't have a need to block that or shut that up. I think it's fine. And like, I know who I am as a person. I know my strengths and weaknesses, and it doesn't really affect me.
The reason I block heavily, besides the fact, first of all, to clean up my feed, right? So I'm not dealing with a lot of bullshit, and that is a personal choice, and I can easily see both sides. Because if you're blocking, then that person might be shady today, but they might have something profound tomorrow. So there is a cost there, to be sure. But I also, like, I did a live stream with Kurt Schlichter over the weekend, right? And I'm going to start doing those more often. And because of having not only it's not a function of blocking, but it's being explicit about how you expect people to behave. And I'm not exactly a nice person myself. I know that if Kurt or you or Tom or Buck Sexton's going to be on is going to be on one of these live streams, the commenters aren't going to be stuff that bothers them and offends them and is going to leave them with a bad taste in their mouth,
No, that's
and in my
fair.
mouth because I'm the host. So like that's my approach here. Like I want to know, especially if I'm inviting a female or someone who's gay or something like that, that it's not going to be just not funny stuff. Like I'm all there. I was watching this show and they're talking about a roast. It goes, you can be as mean as you want as long as it's funnier than it is mean.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's there's something about that where like it's kind of like the intent is a big part of what matters. And you know, like, because even if there's a roast joke that fails, like it's
Sure.
like, that one just wasn't that funny, if you can tell that person, the goal of what they were saying was to get you to laugh rather than to like ruin your day, then you know then to me it's kind of like there's a pass there. The literally the worst thing I ever saw was like the shittiest comedy I ever saw, and I don't mean shitty like bad comedy, I mean like fucking that's wrong, was when they had Ann Coulter on that roast. And it was just so obvious. Like the whole idea of roasting and what's amazing about it is like, first off, it started, the idea was like you roast your friends. Like you would have a dais of close friends, like in the like, you know, Dean Martin roast and shit like that, who are like roasting each other because they love each other and they've got the dirt on each other. And this is us busting balls and this is how we have fun and it's hilarious and everybody's like jabbing at everybody. Then like, you know, it kind of changed over the years, but what they were doing with Ann Coulter was not like trying to be funny. It was trying to get her, and then everybody would kind of like fake laugh way louder to be like ha 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 ha. It was like this like fucking like this like social justice version of punching up. The idea that comedy's supposed to hit the bad guy, which to me was never the spirit of comedy. Like I think that shit's gross. The spirit of comedy is to make people laugh, to say something hilarious. If I'm shitting on Hillary Clinton in my stand-up special, or I'm shitting on Donald Trump, my goal is not to like piss off the Hillary Clinton supporter. The goal is to make the Hillary Clinton supporter belly laugh and then be like, shit, I got to admit that was pretty funny. Like, it's not something to like exclude. It's supposed to bring people together, as gay as that sounds.
If you were to crowdfund a book, right, what would that book be?
Like I'm going to write a book?
No, someone's going to buy you a book for your shelf, like a cool collectible.
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, like that's an interesting one. If I were going to crowdfund a book, you know, like maybe like some like first edition of like one of my heroes would be cool. Like if there
a first edition Rothbard or Mises.
Yeah, that would like be awesome. I've never really thought about that before, but like something like that would be really fucking cool. Or like an autographed copy of like Human Action or something like that. That'd be awesome.
I have a copy of one of Mises's books signed to Hazlitt.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like that's so fucking cool.
It's so cool. And it's really kind of funny because these kind of things, like their price is irrelevant. There's no way this is ever leaving my house.
Right.
I mean, this you can offer me. I mean, just the principle alone, like I would feel gross selling it. Even honestly, if they gave me $1 million, I would have to think about it. No, $1 million, I would do it. Okay, I'm talking out of my ass because that is a life-changing amount of money. But it would have to be stupid amounts of money.
Or things have gone really, really bad.
Yeah, but there's other things I would sell first before that, because that's how, a personal thing.
That's how bad things have gone.
Yeah,
You've sold all those other things.
Yeah. What steps are you taking to kind of keep people in your orbit from not falling into despair during these times?
Well, I mean, I don't like.
Or do you not feel that responsibility for your audience? Because you're a dad, you've got better priorities.
Well, I feel some degree of responsibility in that way. Like I think that it's certainly, you know, if you have the ear of a lot of people who value what you're saying, you always want to try to help as best you can. But that to me is very secondary to what my primary responsibility is, which is to always be on my game and tell the truth as I see it. Like, it's like, to me, it's like there's like two, different things that I do. Like, I do, stand up, and I do podcasting. And so, like, and Skanks is in like the comedy side of what I do. And part of the problem is obviously much more sincere. But my job as a comedian is to make people laugh. Like, that comes before anything else. It's my job is, if I get on a stage, is to kill and have the room dying laughing. And if I'm and part of the problem, my job is to like have an interesting perspective, to be up on my shit, know what I'm talking about, and to absolutely never lie, to always tell the truth as I see it. And so if I thought there was reason to despair, and like, or like this is the truth, that things are really bad here, then I would say that, and I wouldn't, you know what I mean, because that's like my brand, and that's what people have come to me for. So that's my job, is to always have that. And it's kind of, in a way, it's like the only thing I really have going for myself. Like, if I lose that, then what's the point of me?
Yeah, one of the things that's a big trigger for me is that sometimes people will accuse me of being a contrarian. And there's two senses of that word, one of which is true and one which is not. There's one sense in which, well, he says things that are against the mainstream, and that's indisputably true. I do not have a mainstream perspective. And I when I see mainstream, I tend to, be arm's length and be like, something's going to be wrong here, because it's going to be corporate interests who are kind of trying to put something over. But a lot of times, because, you and I are anarchists, we would tend to, broadly speaking, see things in the same way. And I think 99 times out of 100, in terms of conclusions and principles, we would be identical. But like, sometimes we'll look at a situation, just interpersonal, and see things from different points of view. So when people say I'm a contrarian there, in the sense of, oh, he doesn't mean that, he's just saying it to go against anarchists or libertarians, I'm like, I promise you, if I'm not trolling, and I'm not trolling when I do these interviews, I mean it. Sometimes I do take the leftist perspective. Sometimes I do, like with the Cuomo one. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I think you're being hard on him. That doesn't make me a statist. It just says this is not, in my view, an example of statism at its worst. This is an example of statism at its average, which is still pretty shitty. So it's funny because people think, just like, oh, if they listen to the same music as you, that you guys are going to be the same personality. It's like, oh, me and this person have the same worldview. So if he's not applying that worldview as I would expect in this instance, he's being insincere or being intentionally provocative. And it's not that way. And it really does bother me. Because I almost think if someone thinks I'm being insincere, there's no point talking.
Yes. And no, I know what you mean. And so that and I've heard, I've been called that before, like a contrarian. And the other term, the term that bothers me more is provocateur. That one really bothers me, because
I like that one. Interesting. Go ahead. Because I do that more than you do.
Well, yeah, but to me, it has a similar implication of almost like, well, you just like to provoke, so you'll just say whatever to provoke. Although I do acknowledge that I certainly have like contrarian and provocative instincts. I mean, I do like that. Like, if I really believe something that's going to provoke people, I enjoy.
Oh yeah.
Poking people with it. And there's no question, I do have like a contrarian instinct in me. I've really noticed that over the course of these lockdowns, like just things that are kind of like silly, where my instincts will just be like, even when everybody's clapping for the medical workers at 7 p.m., there's something about that bothers me. Like, I don't like this. I don't want to just be another person in the group clapping, like kind of worshiping a whole class of people. This seems weird to me. But I mean, that's a hell of a lot better than worshiping the troops, for sure. I'd rather worship nurses than soldiers or cops.
I'd rather give the nurse a home-cooked meal.
Well, yes,
that's
right.
You know what I mean? Instead of applause that they can't hear.
Yeah, but there's something about it when there's just a whole group of people applauding that I just want to sit there not applauding. Right. Like, there's something about that. And just, like, I remember I was seeing on like, this is just how my mind works, right? But I was watching on the news like last month or something like that, where there was like these pictures of COVID patients who had recovered, and, they're being wheeled out and everybody claps as they're being wheeled out of the hospital. Like, yay, you beat COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like the first thought I had, and I think I said this to my father-in-law, we were watching the news together, and my first thought was like, as the guy coming out who just had open heart surgery, and is recovered, and they're kind of like, yay. Oh, no, he's not COVID. He's not COVID. Like, let him keep going. You know what I mean? But like my mind just goes right to the kind of like, well, I don't know. I don't want to just clap. Let me think about what's ridiculous about this or something like that. You know, like, so I do have those, but I won't just take a position that I don't believe in just to be a contrarian. So that's what bothers me about those terms.
And the other thing is, a lot of times people are like, I don't understand how you can say X, Y, and Z. And that's fair. But I assure you, I just have a different point of view. And, you know, maybe it could be I'm having a brain fart. Or it could be I just don't like the speaker and I think he's an asshole, and that's coloring my perception of him. I mean, it could be a million different things. It was really funny because I had a poll over the weekend that I ran on Twitter. I said, you can't use the loophole of depending on who the vice president is. Who would you rather be president right now, Biden or Obama? And that was a tough question for a lot of people. I thought about it. I said Biden. And there were plenty of people who were just like, oh, well, you're just trolling. And it's like, really, you can't even wrap your head around any case for Biden to be preferable to Obama. Like, even if you don't agree with it.
Well, I'm curious what your reasoning for that is, because I agree. I would prefer Biden to Obama. But what was your reasoning?
I don't think Biden is anywhere near as ideological as Obama. I think Biden would be less easy for the corporate press to deify. I think he's a lot less charismatic. I think his accomplishments were moderate. They certainly weren't. And I think Biden, even though he's a creature of Washington, lived there since the 70s, been their senator, I don't think he represents the cathedral to the extent that Obama does. Obama is very much a product of this Ivy League, effete, very philosophical approach in the Wilson model of having the elites, meaning Ivy League graduates in certain institutions running this country. I don't think that's Biden's mentality at all. And I think it'd be a lot easier for the Republicans to fight Biden in many ways and have that be that stalemate that we would like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they're both, products of the cathedral, and obviously they're both, have a lot of just negative, like terrible qualities to them. But my biggest one, why that's an easy answer for me, is if you go look at Obama giving you remember the night he won that speech that he gave in front of, tens and tens of thousands of people, moving them to tears. Biden doesn't have that. And that's a lot more dangerous. That's a lot more dangerous. Obama is, his level of charisma and public speaking ability is off the charts. And that makes him a much, much more dangerous president. I would much rather that's why I'd much rather have Hillary Clinton than Barack Obama in, because she just comes off as a corrupt liar, which she is. Obama is also, but he doesn't come off that way. And I think there's something, that's worse.
And I could have also made the case for Obama. At the very least, I could think he's less of a warmonger than Biden. I think it would be useful to, after 12 years, for the bloom to come off the rose. People forget that Obama gave us the biggest Republican majority since the 1920s. And he, did enormous rejuvenation for the Republican Party and gave us President Trump. So these things are very rarely, black and white, just like Obama himself. Okay, we are running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this episode?
I liked when you showed me those little diorama figuring trinket things.
You are welcome.